Thank you, Chair. Well, it's incredibly disappointing. I understand the amendments help make this motion a little bit better. We've already acknowledged that I think there are serious issues and concerns around whether or not, and Dr. Fry's also talked about the procedural elements of this, but it's fine if the Conservatives want to take the chair today and completely shut down the ability to continue our study on India, to limit our study on Russia. I mean, it fits within the Conservatives' approach. We had, as a committee, by majority vote, determined our next steps, which was Mr. McGregor's India motion. We were the foreign interference of India. We are just getting into some of that testimony. The Russian study, the testimony we just heard today with, I think, really compelling information around journalism and how journalists are being targeted. And before we even concluded the full hour of that, we had Conservatives reprogramming the plan to try and avoid continuing that testimony or that study. So when it comes to the amendment itself, while I recognize Mr. McGregor's attempts to, again, at least include it, I think the fact that the first version didn't make any mention to our studies around India should be very, very concerning for the community. We saw that Conservatives, during our study on foreign interference on India, did not ask questions around India's involvement.
Mr. Lloyd.
I just want to clarify that this committee had already agreed on the meetings to India, so it was viewed as needlessly repetitive to include that in there because we were going to be conducting these meetings on India, but we did support the friendly amendment brought forward by Mr. McGregor, and we have no problems with continuing that study.
That's not a point of order.
Thank you, Ms. That is up to me, Ms. O'Connell. Ms. O'Connell, you may resume your time or your time to speak.
Thank you. Well, I mean, we can clearly see how this is going to go. The committee can just be, points of orders will now just be debate because they don't like me calling out the fact that Conservatives didn't ask about India's involvement that have been outlined by community members through testimony, the RCMP press conference, and instead, actually, it was Mr. Motz who asked about criminals in India seemed to be of a higher importance than actually what Canadians were feeling in this country. So to add it as a sub-amendment to this motion, I think does a real disservice to the very compelling testimony that we heard. It feels like a slapped on, saving face for a motion that clearly is drawn up by Conservatives who don't want to talk about India interfering in our democratic institutions, the allegations around violence in our communities being organized with organized crime from India deeply into our communities. The fact that it was left out of this motion, I don't think is a mistake. The fact that Conservatives would like to move away from that study is not surprising given how...
Mr. Motz.
I think there needs to be a limit on the amount of patently false information that an individual could speak at any committee. And what we're hearing spewed at this current moment is certainly patently false.
Mr. Motz, thank you, but let's make sure that we are being specific on our complaints.
My hand is up, Chair.
Yes, Ms. O'Connell is still speaking, Ms. Fry, but I have you on the list after Mr. Chahal. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you. Again, if we if we had rules on misinformation being spread by Conservative Party, we would never be able to conduct any meetings. It's more of an uncomfortable situation. I think they also made the mistake of hoping to do this motion in camera, but unfortunately forgot that we were still in camera, and now Canadians are going to see that they put forward a motion without any mention of foreign interference, our study on foreign interference on India. It was Mr. McGregor's amendment that at least acknowledged that, which I'm speaking to right now. But the fact that this motion came prepared without mention of it, I think should send shockwaves to our community, to the Sikh community, to several other communities who have been raising alarm bells about the violence that they have experienced. And again, to see Conservatives put forward a motion completely ignoring the very damning testimony that we heard and the very concerning testimony. Something that moved me was Mr. Moninder Singh's testimony, where he spoke about the fact that there were threats of violence made towards him and his family, that it almost, security became, and I'm paraphrasing here, but security to him almost became like difficult to imagine and understand anymore because of how serious these threats were. The thought that you have to think about, he mentioned about being around other people, including us in this room, and what that meant to the safety and security to people who weren't even involved in some of, the allegations and the things that, he was being targeted for. So the fact that he had to worry about even coming here in person for his own personal safety, and we are the Public Safety and National Security Committee, and and the suggestion was here today, was to move away from that study, to ignore those concerns. Mr. Motz is shaking his head no, but the motion presented had no mention of India and foreign interference and the testimony we had heard. Frankly, I feel that the testimony we heard was just getting started. We had just heard from our public safety, national security advisors. We had a few community members. I've mentioned already one, Mr. Moninder Singh and others, but we were really just getting started. And so to program away from that, I find deeply concerning. I know of community members myself, but certainly I think my colleagues from the GTA and certainly Vancouver and British Columbia are seeing firsthand and have probably heard from their community of the very real threats. Conservatives in the House often raise the issue of extortion, but don't raise the issues around and the allegations laid out by the RCMP around extortion being used as a form of foreign interference. By the Modi government, that has been linked to organized crime, and yet no mention of any of that. The Public Safety National Security Committee and no mention of that until Mr. McGregor brought forward this amendment. I think we all should be deeply, deeply worried that Conservative members could hear that testimony and say, no, that's enough, let's move on. It makes me wonder, because we also heard testimony, I think, from every single witness that was asked, should the leader of the opposition receive his security clearance so that he could properly get the full briefing and the scope of the information around the foreign interference of India and the attempts against our democracy? Every single witness said yes. Every single witness. So it shouldn't really be a surprise to anyone that now Conservatives bring forward a motion completely ignoring that testimony. There have been questions raised in the media around the Conservative.
Mr. Shipley.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to point out that obviously there's a filibuster going on right now in preventing this committee from doing any work and studying some very serious issues that we've all discussed around this country right now. And I think that's a bit of a shame on behalf of the Liberals.
Thank you, Mr. Shipley. That is not a point of order, but we will go to Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you, Chair. I won't apologize for standing up for our communities who have been threatened with violence. Conservatives want to change the channel and moved a motion. They want to fight with me now because...
Mr. Lloyd, please.
I just, something that Ms. O'Connell said, that there's no mention of India in this motion. I'm a bit confused because it does talk about India in the motion. Can the chair clarify to the committee that we are talking about India in this motion?
Just a point of clarification. It has not been amended. It does say India. So technically you are correct, Mr. Lloyd. Ms. O'Connell?
The amendment brought forward by Mr. McGregor prioritize.
Why did you oppose the inclusion of India?
We have not
the chair,
voted, have
please.
we?
Let's get to it.
Well, of course, the Conservatives
Many
would
members-
love
They don't
to
want to
get to
vote
that.
to include
Just
India.
a moment, please. Please, committee members through the chair, please. Thank you. Point of order, Mr. Hall. Mr. Chahal, pardon me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My colleague, Mr. Connell, was just trying to provide a speech, and I find it quite disrespectful that a number of colleagues turned on the mics at the same time. I know it's hard for interpreters to interpret when a number of members are speaking, so I would just ask one member at a time so the member can speak and be heard, and members can express their point of orders individually if required.
Thank you, Mr. Chahal. It is an important suggestion. I don't believe that's a point of order either. Ms. O'Connell?
Thank you. Like I said, I'm not surprised. It's going to continue to happen. I'm going to be interrupted quite a lot because that was the intention of the original motion, that not for the fact that Mr. McGregor moved an amendment, the original motion made no mention of our study on foreign interference in India. I believe Mr. McGregor is very sincere in wanting to continue that study. Unfortunately, the Conservatives have brought forward a motion with zero mention of it. And then they want to say that they care too until the writing is here in front of us in black and white, and their intentions are very clear. So it is a huge disservice to the testimony we've heard, the serious nature of the allegations, the fact that the Conservatives have yet to ask a question about the allegations of India's involvement in extortions, in a murder, in other violence, and in undermining our democratic institutions, purporting disinformation, misinformation. The Conservatives have yet to ask a single question in this study, so it should be of no surprise to any Canadians that they would like to program away from this. The other component, as I was speaking to before I was interrupted, again, shouldn't be any surprise, was the fact that witness after witness actually confirmed what I think we've all known and felt, was the fact that if a leader of an opposition who wants to be prime minister one day and wants to stand up for the safety and security of Canadians, then they should also want to get a security clearance so they can be properly briefed. And I think we had CSIS and others confirm that in order to get a proper briefing on the full extent of the foreign interference around the Indian government, was that a security clearance was the best way to do so. And it's incredibly cynical of politics and politicians when as soon as the Conservatives start getting criticized, instead of diving into these allegations, they say, let's change the channel. Let's change the subject. And then they want to, raise points of order suggesting a filibuster. Well, again, I am not going to apologize for standing up for our communities. And I think Conservatives should be made to feel very uncomfortable by their actions here today. And I'm sure their constituents will let them know. But that's on them. Here we go.
Mr. Shipley.
Just a quick point of order. I'm very, very, very comfortable here today.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Shipley. Thank you.
Yeah, it was close.
Ms. O'Connell, were you done, or did you want me to go to Mr. Chahal is next?
That's great. I was not done.
That's why I'm asking you, Ms. O'Connell.
Not a problem. They can keep interrupting. And again, we will continue to speak and stand up for our communities because this is what's deeply important. We've just started that testimony, and but for the fact of Mr. McGregor's amendment, the Conservatives have shown very clearly to all Canadians their intentions. I think that was an accident. I think they meant to do this in camera, but unfortunately, they've been able to show Canadians just exactly who they want to stand up for. So I will stop here, allow my other colleagues to speak, but I'd like to be re-added to the list on the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connell.